a leaf turning yellow and soft, the stem becoming mushy to the touch. This is the hallmark of overwatering, the single most prevalent cause of indoor plant mortality. This condition is frequently misdiagnosed as dryness, leading to fatal corrective errors. Contrast this with the brittle brown edges of a drought-stressed specimen. These visual indicators are the signs your plants give you, yet misinterpreting them triggers a cascade of physiological failure. We break down the precise signals of hydration stress, ensuring you can audit your plant's health before the damage becomes irreversible. However, ignoring these warnings does not merely result in biological decay. It initiates a silent, recurring drain on your annual budget. Most cultivators view the necrosis of a single specimen as a minimal biological failure, a trivial event isolated to a specific corner of the living space. However, meticulous analysis reveals that these isolated incidents, when aggregated over a fiscal year, coagulate into a recurring budgetary leak that frequently surpasses the cost of a high-end appliance. For the average enthusiast, the cumulative capital mandated to replace destroyed biomass, specialized substrates, and containment vessels represents a substantial recurring expense. This figure is not derived from the unavoidable predation of pests or insufficient luminosity, but is driven by water mismanagement, which research identifies as one of the primary causes of indoor plant mortality. This reality underscores a critical inefficiency in domestic horticulture that mirrors the significant crop losses observed in large-scale agriculture due to identical hydration errors. The economic hemorrhage begins at the point of acquisition. Consumers typically purchase mature, visually impactful specimens rather than low-cost propagations. The retail price of such a plant reflects a significant markup, compensating the commercial grower for months or years of professional care, climate control, and fertilization. When a cultivator inadvertently initiates the cycle of root rot through oversaturation, they are not merely losing a biological organism. They are instantly liquidating the premium paid for the plant's maturity. The actual cost to propagate a replacement from a cutting is negligible compared to the retail value destroyed by the error. Consequently, the cycle of purchase, saturation, necrosis, and subsequent replacement functions as a hidden subscription service to failure. This drains resources that could otherwise fund the expansion of the collection or the acquisition, contamination, necessitating its disposal. Furthermore, the contained environment of a pot often suffers from salt buildup and mineral deposits associated with persistent moisture, rendering the vessel itself a liability. Experts confirm that wasted soil amendments and pots that become unusable due to these conditions contribute significantly to the total economic loss. A primary driver of this asset destruction is the utilization of decorative ceramics lacking drainage infrastructure. While aesthetically pleasing, a vessel without an exit strategy for excess liquid creates a perched water table. The water accumulates at the base, submerging the root system in a stagnant bath while the surface appears deceptively dry. This structural error ensures that any investment in the plant is short-lived, as the roots are physically unable to respire. Therefore, proper drainage is non-negotiable. The alternative, planting in nursery liners with adequate drainage holes positioned inside decorative cachepos, is a standardized protocol often ignored, leading to the avoidable proliferation of rot. Analyzing the operational costs further reveals the inefficiency of the hit-and-run watering technique. Moistening only the top layer of the soil fails to hydrate the deeper root infrastructure, resulting in a weak, shallow root system incapable of sustaining the plant's biomass. This practice renders the applied water and nutrients ineffective as they never reach the absorption zone. Conversely, the heavy-handed application of water to a pot without drainage creates a hostile environment where nutrients are chemically locked out or washed away, contributing to a dual loss of hydration resources and fertilizer capitalization. The narrative surrounding plant care must therefore shift from one of biological nurturing to one of strict asset management. This implies treating your collection not merely as living decor requiring affection, but as a capital investment where longevity depends on precise environmental control rather than emotional guesswork. The primary drain on the cultivator's resources is the fundamental physiological misunderstanding of how water interacts with the root zone. To arrest this financial hemorrhage, one must first understand the mechanism that transforms a life-sustaining solvent into a suffocating agent, creating a lethal environment where the plant is deprived of a critical gas. Roots function not merely as biological anchors, but as complex respiratory organs that demand oxygen with the same urgency that they require moisture. This delicate physiological equilibrium is frequently shattered growth. In reality, water acts strictly as a mechanical solvent for nutrient transport, a carrier medium that allows nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to move from the soil substrate into the vascular system. When this solvent is applied in excess, it floods the porous architecture of the soil, physically displacing the oxygen pockets essential for respiration and initiating a catastrophic chain of events. The immediate consequence of this displacement is root hypoxia, a state where the root system is effectively drowned in a stagnant aquatic environment. The soil, designed to hold a balance of gas and liquid, becomes a suffocating medium. In these oxygen-deprived conditions, the bacteria in the soil completely changes. Aerobic organisms, which support healthy root function, are asphyxiated and replaced by anaerobic bacteria. These opportunistic pathogens thrive solely in the absence of air, proliferating rapidly in the wet sludge. They do not merely inhabit the soil, they actively digest the root tissue, turning the plant's foundational infrastructure into a decaying slurry. This biological process is known as root rot, a condition that permanently destroys the root's ability to absorb water and nutrients, rendering the photosynthesis process impossible. The foliage acts as a biological dashboard, displaying specific data points regarding this subterranean crisis. Yet these signals are often misinterpreted. As Rachel Tenney, host of the Plant School podcast, observes, people frequently assume a struggling plant requires hydration and subsequently overwater it, especially when uncertainty exists regarding volume. This instinct accelerates the suffocation. However, the symptoms of drowning are visibly distinct from those of drought. Nell Foster explains that overwatered plants typically exhibit yellowing leaves and stems that turn mushy or necrotic. Brown spots may appear on the foliage, signaling cellular collapse from within. Conversely, a lack of moisture presents a radically different visual profile. Leaves become pale and wrinkled, while the edges turn brittle and dry due to an inability to maintain turgor pressure. The danger lies in the potential for misdiagnosis. A plant suffering from advanced root rot may display wilting, a symptom mechanically identical to dehydration because the destroyed roots can no longer transport liquid to the canopy. Misinterpreting this drowning root system as thirsty creates a fatal feedback loop. The cultivator adds water to cure the wilt, further fueling the anaerobic bacteria and sealing the plant's fate. Nell Foster emphasizes that a plant can often recover from the stress of underwatering once hydration is restored, as the tissue remains structurally sound. Root rot, however, represents a rapid descent into decomposition. Recovery from this necrotic state is arduous, often requiring the full excavation of the plant, the surgical removal of decaying biomass, and repotting into fresh, sterile media. The volume of the containment vessel further complicates this hydraulic equation. The physics of water retention dictate that smaller pots and tightly bound root balls dry rapidly, necessitating frequent inspection. If a specimen becomes excessively pot-bound, the ratio of root mass to soil increases to a point where the system struggles to retain sufficient moisture. For instance, a dense, spiraling root mass can act like a hydrophobic brick, causing applied water to simply run down the gap between the soil and the pot wall without penetrating the core. This paradoxically leads to symptoms of underwatering, even if the watering schedule is consistent. Conversely, placing a small root system in an oversized container ensures the surrounding soil retains moisture far longer than the plant can absorb it, creating localized zones of hypoxia. The objective is to visually audit the plant's health by distinguishing between reversible turgidity loss and irreversible structural rot. Yet, even the most astute visual assessment cannot compensate for a containment vessel that is fundamentally engineered to trap toxic levels of fluid. This structural oversight transforms a vessel into a hazard if it lacks the mechanical capacity to release what the plant cannot consume. A vessel without an exit strategy for water is not a functional pot. It is a stagnant reservoir waiting to turn toxic. The aesthetic appeal of decorative ceramics often masks a fatal engineering flaw. the complete absence of drainage holes. This omission represents a critical infrastructure failure in container gardening, specifically because it prevents excess liquid from escaping the system. When water enters this sealed environment, gravity pulls the fluid downward until it strikes the impermeable base, where it begins to pool. Without a mechanical release valve, the container effectively functions as a closed hydraulic loop, trapping moisture indefinitely against the lowest layer of the root mass and initiating a sequence of biological decay. This accumulation creates a phenomenon known in physics as a perched water table. Consider the agricultural challenge of a field with a compacted subsoil layer. While the surface appears arable and dry, water pools just inches below, drowning the crop's foundation, oxygen, an element required for cellular respiration. Consequently, the root ball is essentially left sitting in a bath of stagnant water and accumulated minerals, inevitably leading to root rot and eventual plant death as anaerobic conditions suffocate the submerged tissue. The structural error forces the plant to endure a permanent state of immersion. As the water sits, it acts as a solvent for mineral salts from fertilizers and tap water, creating a toxic brine that burns sensitive root hairs. This leachate, unable to exit the vessel, concentrates over time, turning the soil medium into a chemical hazard. Unlike a natural ecosystem where groundwater moves and refreshes, the sealed pot creates a dead zone. The roots, seeking moisture, grow downward into this toxic sludge, where they encounter an environment strictly hostile to their survival. What appears to be a protective vessel serves, in practice, as a watertight coffin that accelerates the decomposition of the biological asset it was meant to preserve. The mistake extends beyond the lack of drainage to the spatial calibration of the container itself. Pot size plays a significant role in determining the rate at which the soil medium dries. Smaller pots, characterized by their limited soil volume, tend to dry out rapidly, necessitating a high-frequency watering schedule to maintain adequate hydration. In contrast, larger vessels retain moisture for extended periods due to the sheer mass of the substrate. This discrepancy becomes particularly problematic when a plant possessing a small root ball is placed in an oversized container. The excess soil in a large pot holds onto moisture for much longer than the plant's limited root system can absorb it. This imbalance significantly increases the risk of dry, lighter-colored crust on the surface, visually signaling an arid environment. However, this crust frequently masks dangerous levels of saturation merely inches below, acting as a deceptive barrier that leads the cultivator to apply additional fluids to a system that is already drowning in the lower strata. To bypass this deception, a standardized physical audit must be implemented immediately. The most effective manual protocol is the finger test. This procedure involves inserting a digit directly into the substrate up to the second knuckle, a depth of approximately 2 to 3 inches. This intrusion penetrates the deceptive surface crust and extracts immediate tactile data regarding the true moisture content of the root zone. If the soil at this depth feels dry, the system likely requires hydration. If it remains cool and damp to the touch, the application of water must be delayed, regardless of the visual cues presented by the surface layer. Failing to perform this deep audit often leads to the hit-and-run watering technique. This operational flaw involves the frequent application of small, insufficient volumes of water, wetting only the top inch of the substrate. This superficial hydration fails to penetrate the hydraulic conductivity barrier of the soil, leaving the primary root zone in a state of chronic drought. The biological consequences of these surface-level assumptions are structurally devastating. When moisture is consistently available only in the top stratum of the soil, the plant adapts its architecture accordingly. It develops a weak, shallow root system that clusters near the surface, neglecting the deeper soil volume. This malformation renders the plant exceptionally vulnerable to skipped waterings and thermal fluctuations, as it lacks the deep-seated anchor roots necessary for stability and nutrient acquisition. For larger containment vessels where the finger test is mechanically insufficient, alternative instrumentation is required to extract data from the core. A plain wooden dowel can be utilized as a biological dipstick, inserted cautiously into the center of the root mass and left for several minutes. Upon retraction, the wood reveals the humidity gradient of the soil profile. A dowel that returns damp or darkened by moisture indicates sufficient internal hydration, with thorough saturation of the ground, followed by a distinct period of drying. This cycle is vital for allowing adequate oxygenation of the root zone between waterings. The drying phase allows the water to recede, pulling fresh oxygen down into the soil pores, a process essential for root respiration. Therefore, the cultivator must adopt a regimen of deep, infrequent watering. This involves saturating the medium until runoff occurs, ensuring the entire soil column is hydrated, and then withholding fluids until the diagnostic tools confirm the drying cycle is complete. Implementing depth-based moisture auditing safeguards the root system against both desiccation and asphyxiation, establishing a rhythm of care that aligns with biological requirements. Yet, even with correct measurement of the soil moisture, the hydraulic equation remains incomplete. The rate at which a plant consumes this available water is not static. It is heavily dictated by the invisible ocean of air surrounding the foliage. In this state, the plant must work overtime to replenish its internal fluids, leading to rapid soil drying and necessitating a high-frequency watering schedule. Conversely, in environments characterized by high humidity, this transpiration process decelerates significantly. The moisture-saturated air creates a resistance that prevents water loss, meaning the plant consumes its resources far more slowly. Ignoring this operational variable renders any static watering schedule dangerous, as applying a standard volume of water to a plant in a humid environment inevitably leads to saturation and rot. To accurately gauge this atmospheric demand, industrial growers and advanced horticulturists rely on a metric known as vapor pressure deficit, or VPD. Unlike simple relative humidity, VPD calculates the precise difference between the amount of moisture the air can theoretically hold when fully saturated and the actual amount it currently contains. A high VPD indicates dry air with a massive capacity to absorb water, driving transpiration rates up and depleting soil moisture rapidly. A low VPD signifies that the air is near saturation. For the calibration of inputs, preventing the common error of drowning a plant that is metabolically paused due to atmospheric resistance. Once the volume of water is calibrated to the atmosphere, the chemical composition of the fluid itself requires an immediate audit. The water flowing from a standard municipal tap often contains dissolved minerals and sanitation chemicals that function as a low-level toxin to sensitive biological systems. Specifically, the presence of fluoride and chlorine creates a chemical hazard for species that cannot process these elements. Plants such as Dracaena, spider plants, ti plants, prayer plants, and palms possess a physiological intolerance to these additives. When tap water is consistently applied, these chemicals do not simply evaporate. They accumulate within the soil substrate, creating a concentrated zone of toxicity. The biological reaction to this chemical accumulation is visible and destructive. The plant attempts to push these unrecognizable elements to the furthest points of its vascular system, resulting in leaf tip necrosis. This condition manifests as brown, dry edges on the foliage, a symptom often misdiagnosed as underwatering or low humidity. However, this is a chemical burn occurring from the inside out. To mitigate this damage, the water source must be purified. The introduction of rainwater, distilled water, or water collected from a dehumidifier eliminates the fluoride and releases moisture. It raises the local humidity for its neighbors, effectively lowering the vapor pressure deficit in the immediate area. This shared atmospheric shield slows down the rate of water loss for every plant in the cluster, reducing the frequency of required irrigation compared to a specimen isolated in a dry room. This environmental context transforms watering from a routine, calendar-based task into a dynamic response system. However, even perfect atmospheric management cannot override the fundamental shift that occurs when the planet's orientation changes. As solar cycles shorten following the autumnal equinox, the metabolic engine of the plant undergoes a profound physiological deceleration. This shift in light availability signals the organism to enter a state of metabolic dormancy, a survival mechanism where priority shifts from foliage expansion to root preservation and core maintenance. During these darker, cooler months, the demand for photosynthesis and nutrient transport drops precipitously. The plant effectively downshifts its biological machinery, reducing its water consumption requirements by 50% or more compared to the active summer growing season. However, while the plant adjusts its internal clock with absolute precision, the cultivator's watering routine often remains disastrously constant, leading to a hydraulic crisis within the container. This discrepancy between the plant's reduced intake and the cultivator's static habit creates a lethal inefficiency known as seasonal misalignment. When a high-volume summer watering cadence is enforced during winter, the soil is flooded with resources the plant cannot metabolize. The roots, now in a resting state, are incapable of processing this excess intake. Instead of fueling growth, the water accumulates in the substrate, creating a cold, stagnant, anaerobic environment. Research confirms that continuing a summer schedule during this period is the fastest route to root rot, as the plant's ability to absorb utilities is significantly diminished. Consequently, this specific seasonal misalignment kills more indoor plants than the severe dehydration associated with summer droughts. The tragedy lies in the fact that the plant does not die of thirst. It drowns in a surplus of care it cannot consume. To eliminate this human error and align hydration with the biological reality of dormancy, the industry has shifted toward precision irrigation technology. While historically the domain of large-scale agriculture, these systems have been adapted for the serious indoor enthusiast looking to scale their operation without sacrificing precision. The financial investment for this infrastructure is calculable and efficient. The cost of installing a residential drip irrigation system averages approximately $520, with a typical installation range spanning from $310 to $815, depending on the complexity of the zone. When broken down by coverage, this technology costs an average of $325 per square foot, a minimal expense when weighed against the cumulative value of the rare specimens it protects from winter necrosis. The architecture of a residential distribution tubing, which carries the water supply to the target zones. Critical to the system's integrity are adapters and connectors that ensure a leak-proof network, maintaining consistent hydraulic pressure. A pressure regulator is then employed to moderate the force of the incoming water, ensuring a slow, steady flow that prevents soil displacement. This regulated flow is directed to the emitters, the precision components that control the exact amount of water dispensed. Unlike manual watering, which splashes fluid across the surface, emitters deliver moisture directly to the root zone. This targeted approach bypasses surface evaporation entirely, ensuring that every drop is utilized efficiently by the plant. The system's efficiency is further enhanced by the integration of environmental sensors. Rain or moisture sensors can be installed to monitor ambient conditions, adding a layer of automated intelligence to the hydration schedule. These sensors detect when the substrate retains sufficient moisture, common during the humid, cool days of dormancy, and automatically override the irrigation cycle to prevent overwatering. Backflow preventers are also essential, acting as a safeguard to ensure that water from the irrigation lines does not contaminate the potable supply. By automating the delivery process, the system removes the guesswork that leads to dormancy-related fatalities. The transition from reactive manual watering to automated precision does not merely save time. It fundamentally changes the economic equation. By reducing monthly water bills and preventing the loss of biological assets, the technology proves to be a cost-effective solution in the long run. Calibrating frequency to the biological clock and utilizing precision delivery methods ensures the survival of the collection through the darkest months. This shift represents the final component in a comprehensive strategy to arrest the financial hemorrhage caused by common horticultural errors. The transition from reactive guesswork to data-driven hydration management safeguards both the biological asset and the household budget. By mimicking the protocols of precision agriculture, specifically by ensuring adequate drainage infrastructure and auditing soil moisture depth before every application, you move beyond simple ownership to active cultivation. Eliminating these structural and procedural errors seals the recurring financial drain caused by unnecessary replacement costs, allowing those resources to be reinvested in the expansion of the collection. The costly cycle of necrosis is replaced by a thriving ecosystem. What aspect of your current routine will be the first to undergo a technical audit? Let us know in the comments.